He looks at you with an intensity that pierces through. He seeks you with his gaze. He wants to be near you. And yet he flees, he disappears, withdraws, as if the intimacy he so deeply desires turns, at its core, into a danger for him. This is one of the most perplexing paradoxes of human love. A man can love you deeply, desire you fiercely, and still run away the moment you truly begin to reach him. Not because he doesn't love you, but because what he feels for you overwhelms him, because what you awaken in him confronts him with something he has always avoided. Carl Jung dedicated his life to exploring those inner movements that defy logic. For him, love is not just a feeling. It is an archetype, a living force that acts within us like a sacred storm. It comes to shake established structures, erode masks, and make the armor we've forged against vulnerability tremble. When a man loves you and flees, it is not always a sign of a lack of love. Often, it is a sign of an inner struggle. The desire you inspire touches a fragile place, an ancient, buried crack he thought he could control. And suddenly, everything wavers. He flees because you become a mirror too clear. Because through you, he glimpses what he never dared to look at within himself. His need to be loved, his fear of rejection, his feeling of not being enough, and above all, that unknown inner territory he fears so much, the realm of authentic connection, without masks, without power games. Have you ever noticed those silences, those absences, those interrupted gestures? Perhaps you've wondered what you did wrong, but the truth lies elsewhere. It's not what you do, it's what you represent. You have become the embodiment of a love he never learned to receive. Because for many men, receiving love is not a natural reflex, it's a re-education, a vertigo. They have been taught to conquer, to prove, to hide their doubts. But true love is not conquered. It is received with humility. It demands laying down arms, revealing the child hidden beneath the adult man. And that is where everything is decided. You awaken in him what he thought was buried. The child who cries in silence, the wounded adolescent, the man who no longer knows if he can be loved for who he is and not for what he shows. So he pulls away, not to forget you, but to try to find himself again, and sometimes, unfortunately, to avoid facing the power you stir in him that leaves him exposed. There are encounters that act as a revealer, not content with flattering the ego or filling loneliness. They disturb, they unearth what was sleeping, what had been carefully buried. And that is precisely what makes you so different in his eyes. You don't love him only for what he shows, but for what he hides. That, he doesn't know how to handle. When a man has learned to define himself by strength, control, distance, or success, he doesn't know what to do when someone sees beyond that. When you look past his defenses, you perceive his weariness, his confusion, his unspoken desires. Without knowing it, you invite him to step out of his role, a role he has carried for so long that he has identified with it. Jung said that what we often call the other is actually an aspect of ourselves seeking to manifest. You become for him the face of an inner truth he had suppressed, and that can become unbearable. He loves you, yes, but he doesn't know how to live that love without losing what he thought he was. You represent a door, and that door leads to the unknown of his emotions, his own fragility, what he never dared confess, even to himself. He flees because staying close to you risks crumbling. It's feeling his inner foundations tremble, and everything in him unconsciously fights against that fall. He hasn't been prepared to love the way you love. Not with that intensity, not with that listening, not with that transparency. Perhaps he has known power games, relationships based on strategy or need, but not this love that asks for nothing, that reveals everything. That is what scares him, not you, but what your love reveals about him. Because loving, when it is true, is not a refuge from life. It is a storm that questions everything. It is an inner alchemy, and that alchemy in him is still blocked. So he invents excuses. He says he's not ready, that he needs space, that he has too much to do, but deep down, he feels that a single surrender, a single sigh, would make him lose control. And that control, he has mistaken for security. But love cannot be controlled. It transforms, it makes you grow, it destroys false identities to let the soul emerge. And as long as he's not ready for that, he will prefer to flee, even from what he desires most. What you embody is not just a woman he desires. You embody an energy, the deep feminine, the awakened feminine, the feminine that sees, feels, touches the soul before the body. And for a man uninitiated in that invisible language, this can feel like a destabilization. Jung often spoke of the anima, that inner feminine figure that resides in a man and acts as a bridge to his unconscious. When a man meets a woman who awakens that dimension in him, it's not just a story of attraction. It's an archetypal encounter, a symbolic jolt, a psychic activation. And that activation, he doesn't always understand. He may confuse it with anxiety, doubt, or even a sense of losing his footing, because in reality, he's not fleeing from you. He's fleeing from the awakening of something within him, a depth he doesn't yet know how to inhabit. Your gaze pierces him. Your silence invites him to feel. Your tenderness disarms his defense mechanisms. You are the key to an inner world he never dared to explore, but he doesn't yet know the way. And the soul, when suddenly illuminated, can react like a startled animal. It hides, it defends itself, sometimes it scratches. He loves you, yes, but what he feels is unlike anything he's known before. It's not dependency or mere pleasure. It's a call, a jolt, an initiation. And like all initiations, it begins with a loss. The loss of his bearings, the fall of his certainties, the crumbling of his inner walls. So he steps back, not because he rejects you, but because he's trying to survive what you awaken. Perhaps you feel unjustly punished, as if loving with such clarity should lead to loneliness. But in reality, you're a mirror too pure, and it's your light that unsettles him, not your presence. He needs time, not pressure. He must cross his shadows, confront his fears, acknowledge his wounds. Because what you offer is not a superficial game, it's a sacred encounter. And the soul doesn't give itself halfway. It demands that the armor be lowered. And not everyone is ready to do that, at least not immediately. There are loves that wound and others that heal. Yours, however, does both at once. It heals through its sincerity, but it wounds because it forces everything to be felt. You are that rare presence that seeks neither to control, nor seduce, nor please. You are simply there, whole, and that is what few know how to receive. When a man has never been loved in this way, he doesn't know what to do with this gift. He suspects a hidden intention. He waits for the moment when you'll ask for something in return. He fears the instant when you'll see his flaws and leave. He has learned that love is conditional, negotiated, unstable. So when he encounters a love that endures, he doubts. But that doubt is not evidence against you. It's a trace of his wounds. You touch an ancient memory, that of a child who perhaps lacked listening, tenderness, or a gaze, that of an adolescent who had to pretend to be okay, that of a man who, despite his strength, was never seen in his depth. So he looks at you and flees. He feels that if he stays, something in him will have to die. Not his freedom, not his identity, but that old skin he's worn for so long, made of distance, control, and self-protection. He loves you, yes, but you are a step, a portal, and crossing that threshold requires courage. Jung wrote that true love is a confrontation with the unconscious. It's not a sweet, comfortable fusion. It's an alchemy, a trial by fire, a burning mirror. Those who dare to cross it emerge transformed, but never unscathed. That's what you offer him without knowing it. A journey, a change, a reconciliation with himself. And some men at this stage of their lives don't yet know how to take that risk. They love you, but they flee, because staying would force them to be reborn. And to be reborn requires dying to the old self. When a man flees from a woman he loves, he's not fleeing the relationship. He's fleeing the wound that could reopen, the one he's carried in silence for years, the one he's covered with success, sarcasm, independence, but which still lurks beneath the surface. And you, without meaning to, touch that sensitive spot. You didn't seek it, you didn't even name it, but your gaze, your presence, your way of loving awakens it. He loves you, but he feels you can see him in his rawest truth. And that inner nakedness he has never offered to anyone. Perhaps because he was betrayed when he did. Perhaps because he learned that showing his sensitivity means losing his power. Or because he never knew he had the right to be fragile. Jung said that the wound is often the place where the light enters, but one must still dare to remain in that light without fleeing. Yet many men prefer to distance themselves before facing that burn. And when he meets a woman who sees clearly, who loves without condition, who doesn't seek to fill her own voids but to accompany him in his depth, he no longer knows how to play. He can no longer control, seduce, or manipulate. He must be true. And that he hasn't learned. That's why he loves you, but he flees. He flees the possibility of no longer being able to hide. He flees the sweetness that could truly reach him. He flees the beauty of a bond, where he would have to unlearn everything he's been told about what a man should be. He doesn't yet know that it's in that fissure, in that crack, that his true power will be born. The power to love without fear, to give himself without strategy, to be a man without armor. But he will learn, perhaps not right away, perhaps without you, or perhaps because of you. But that truth you've awakened in him can no longer be fully closed. And that's where another form of love often begins, one that doesn't cling but transforms, one that doesn't possess but reveals. You are to him like a mirror that doesn't lie, a clear reflection. And in that mirror, he sees both what he could become and what he's not yet ready to face. He loves you because he feels, near you, the possibility of true love. A love that doesn't deceive, doesn't expect, doesn't force anything. He feels that your presence heals, that it soothes those parts of him that have been crying out for so long without being heard. But that's precisely why he flees, because that kind of love forces him to revisit his entire inner life, to ask questions he never dared to pose, to abandon the roles he played to survive. In you, he perceives the promise of a love without games, and that kind of promise frightens those who always believed love was a market, a negotiation, a fragile balance. He sees you as strong, not in harshness, but in truth. He sees you as gentle, not in submission, but in clarity. He sees you as free, and it's that freedom that disarms him because he understands you don't need him to exist, and that troubles him deeply. Perhaps he thinks he has nothing to offer you, that he won't measure up, or that he might ruin everything. He judges himself harshly, protects himself with irony, distance, or indifference. But it's not you judging him. It's him facing the idealized image he believes he must embody to deserve your love. And that image, he feels he can't sustain for long with you. He feels he'll have to be naked, honest, vulnerable, and that seems too much. Yet he loves you with a raw, clumsy, perhaps silent but real love. A love that, precisely because it is true, overwhelms him. So he leaves, he falls silent, he pulls away, but he carries with him a trace of a gaze that saw, of a love that asked for nothing, and of a woman who showed him without words what he could become if he dared to stay. He doesn't understand why he can't stay, why something in him resists, closes, or shuts down the moment he feels you truly love him. He would like to tell you he's not ready, that he doesn't know how to love like you, but the words don't come. So he stays silent and flees, because what you offer, he has never received. He never learned that someone could love him freely, without merit, without effort, without conquest. He always believed he had to do something to be loved, prove, shine, be strong, be indispensable, and there, in front of you, he has nothing to prove, and that disconcerts him. Your love is naked, like a silence that envelops, like a presence that doesn't weigh but transforms everything. And that silence terrifies him, because in that silence, he hears everything he refused to listen to for so long. His lack, his loneliness, his thirst, his inner void. He loves, but he never learned to receive, because he was taught to give to control, to seduce to avoid rejection, to take to avoid dependence. But to receive, that, he hasn't learned. So when he feels you love him without condition, without expectation, without games, he tells himself it's not possible, it's not real, it's just an illusion. He doubts you because he doubts love itself. He doesn't flee out of malice. He flees because he's facing something unprecedented, an inner experience that none of his past references can explain. Jung wrote that true love brings a man into contact with his most archaic unconscious. It's not a state of pleasure, but a test of truth. And that truth, he's not sure he can bear. You are that truth to him, a living reminder that love has nothing to do with domination or performance, that it is listening, gazing, presence. And that revelation, for a heart that grew up in the urgency of protecting itself, is a silent revolution. He doesn't yet know that by fleeing from you, he's also moving away from the only thing that could one day bring him back to himself. He left, perhaps without a word, perhaps pretending it was nothing, or perhaps looking at you longingly before turning away, as if he knew leaving would be easier than staying. And you remain there, with all that love in your hands, with that void that doesn't feel like a simple departure, but a silence laden with meaning, the kind of silence that still speaks, even in absence. He loved you, and yet he left. But what he doesn't yet know is that this kind of love doesn't fade. It leaves a mark, not of possession or lack, but of revelation. Because once someone has been seen in their truth, it becomes impossible to see themselves as before. You saw not the strong man, nor the role he plays, but the living, trembling, imperfect, beautiful man in his crack. And he knows it. He will remember it, even if he never returns, even if he says nothing, even if he builds another life. Because certain encounters don't belong to time. They inhabit the soul. They become a turning point, a living memory, a quiet call that one day might change everything. Jung said that what we repress always returns in other forms, with greater force, and that love he couldn't embrace, he will meet again. Perhaps elsewhere, perhaps too late, but he will recognize it because you lit a light he cannot extinguish. And you, despite the pain, know it. You know you weren't too much, nor too loving, nor too present, nor too true. You were simply you. And that is enough. Because to love, at its core, is not to hold on to the other, it's to touch them. Even if he leaves, even if he couldn't stay, he received. Perhaps without understanding, perhaps without being able to say it, but what you sowed in him will not be lost. He loved you, but he wasn't ready. He desired you, but he hadn't yet built within himself the space to welcome a relationship not based on fear or lack. You were a new land, fertile, vast, silent, and in the face of that he felt naked. But the seed fell, and a seed, even forgotten, even rejected, always ends up seeking the light. Perhaps one day he'll remember. He'll think back to your simple gestures, your non-judgmental gaze, the way you let him be without ever asking him to be more. And he'll understand that this was love, not a conquest, not a game, but an offering. You were that offering, and that, though he fled, he will never forget. What you lived was not a loss. It was an initiation for him and an awakening for you. Because you too understood that your love was not too great, that your truth was not a burden, that your presence was not a trap. You learned to love without diminishing yourself, to give without erasing yourself, to feel without betraying yourself. And that is the true triumph. Not that he stayed, but that you remained true to yourself. Perhaps one day he'll return, transformed, or perhaps someone else, capable of staying from the start, will recognize what you carry. But what matters is that you didn't dim your light to hold on to someone who wasn't yet ready to look at it. You loved, and that is what makes you free. He left, yes, but something in him remains suspended in your silence, in that gaze you placed on him without judgment, in that sweet, disarming way of telling him, without words, that he could be loved even in his flaws. And you? Perhaps you feel abandoned, forgotten, invisible, but you are not. Because true love is not measured by the duration of a relationship, but by what it leaves in us after the end. You loved, not to fill a void, not to be chosen, but because your heart knew it was right. And though he fled, though he couldn't embrace what you offered, the universe heard it. A love like yours doesn't vanish. It transforms. It heals. It opens paths the other cannot yet see. And now it's time to turn this page without bitterness, to remember that you are whole, that what you give has value, and that the man capable of staying, of loving truly, deeply, without fear, will recognize you.